Hello, I'm Jenny Webber and I'm the founder of Wildlife Drawing. Thank you so much for joining me for this drawing class today. In about 30 minutes, I'm going to be teaching you how to draw a very jolly lobster, which is inspired by the archives of Fortnum and Mason. So you might be wondering, why a lobster? Well, according to Fortnum's archivist, Dr. Tanner, back in 1865, Fortnum sold the Derby hamper, which featured 12 lobsters alongside many other delectable treats. Charles Dickens was such a fan of the Derby hamper, he claimed that if he owned a racehorse, he would call it Fortnum and Mason. And then fast forward to the 1930s, a hand-drawn lobster by illustrator William Hendy first appeared in a Fortnum's catalogue. As such, the Jolly Lobster has become a symbol of hospitality and generosity at Fortnum's, and you'll spot several products featuring an illustrated lobster. Okay, let's get started. As well as all our usual kit, which is paper, pencil, eraser and sharpener, I've also added in one of these fine liner pens. So these are finely nibbed pens that are really good for capturing all the details and the texture and the pattern of the lobster. If you don't have one, any pen will do, even a biro. We're going to be working from this reference image, which is available on the Fortnum's website. And don't worry if you're not an artist or if you even haven't picked up a pencil for a few years. I'm going to be here to talk you through this drawing step by step with plenty of helpful hints along the way. Here we have the reference image. Hopefully you found it on the website. And I chose this image because we get, a real sense of the complexity of the lobster, but also with the claw up there, I thought it looked a bit like he or she was waving at us, so I quite like that. And this here is my kind of one I made earlier, so you can see here the fine liner and all of the sort of cross-hatching techniques that I used. So that we're going to be aiming for something a little bit like this at the end of the tutorial. So I thought it would be a good idea to begin with a little bit of lobster anatomy. So here we've got, these are the two feelers that are coming out, and they are the bits that, obviously feel around in the ocean for food. These are the eyes here, so you can see them much better here, they're nice and beady. There's also the big pincers, okay, so and they're the bits that obviously defend their territory from other lobsters, and well, they look pretty terrifying, I imagine, to things on the bottom of the ocean. We also have 4 walking legs here, so it's good to be aware of the anatomy, even though we can't see them all on our reference image. But what you also can't see is under the abdomen section here, they have these things called swimmerettes. So these little tiny kind of legs that are just intended for swimming. And this amazing fanned out tail here, which we're all familiar with. We can only see a little bit of it there, but I thought it'd be good to point it out. So they really are quite curious and quite strange looking. So today my main advice is to trust your eyes and draw what you see, not what you think the lobster should look like. So first of all, I'd like you to compose your paper. So our image is quite long and sort of landscape today. Make sure you've got enough space either side so you can fit all of your drawing on in one go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take away the one I made earlier here. We start with the sort of simple shapes and lines technique. So when I'm looking at the reference image here, I'm just trying to see simple shapes within it. So for me, the most important shape is probably the oval, a squashed oval, if you like, for the main body of our lobster. And when you've got that oval down on your paper, it means that you can understand then how big the rest of your image is going to be. So I'm going to kind of do it front, center, but sort of a little bit lower to the edge of my paper because I want to make sure we've got this lovely big pincer in here. And so just with very simple, sketchy, light lines with your pencil, just going to create that initial oval shape there for our lobster body. Slightly pointy at the top there, so a little bit like an egg shape, I suppose. Then what I think is a good idea to do is to draw a line right down the middle, because you can see here the lobster is quite symmetrical. And so that line down the middle will really help us figure out what's on either side. We can always rub that line out when we don't need it anymore. Then what we're going to do is, so if we measure within our initial oval, we can see that really the eyes of the lobster are just about, it's maybe just over halfway down. If we put a horizontal line down the middle here, we can just have a little note of where our eyes are. Now we're going to look at the structure of the rest of the lobster, and I think it's obviously makes good sense to start with our pincers first here. But what I really want you to do is look at how the parts of the joints and the parts of the shell really fit together, because that's, I think, the key to getting your crustacean look. So, you know, they're not your sort of simple ball and socket joints. They're quite complicated. They've got these extra sections. They've got sort of spines and things coming off them. But really look at the length of the different joints. And what we're going to do is a sort of very quick shape to try and, you know, get all of the joints in the right place. So if we start here right from the middle, we can see I'm going to start with this left pincer here, and so it sort of starts about here, and then we've got one section that is coming up and joining to the middle section here. So that's kind of the first one. This is the joint here, and then we've got a little bit more of an angle coming out here. So that's a little bit shorter, this section. And then we go into our full sort of pincer, which is lovely and long. We've got a lovely sense of that incredible claw here. And so we're just marking it out, how much it should be away from the body. And we can do exactly the same with this pincer here. So instead of it coming down and leaning on the ground, it's actually coming up in that lovely wave. So again, getting the joints right. So this one is about here, and then we've got that sort of extra section, and then it's this bit that is the sort of the main pincer here, so coming up to about there. It looks a little bit odd at the moment, but don't worry, it will look like a lobster soon. A good way of checking your proportions is to use your original lobster oval and use it as a measuring device, so you can really figure out how long your lobster pincers are. So if you take the initial lobster circle here, and then you kind of measure it in to that length coming out horizontally there. So we sort of pick it up, and then we go 1, 2, and it's sort of 2 and a bit. And so you can cross-reference on your actual drawing. So if we pick the oval up here, we've got 1, 2, and an extra bit. So I know that that pincer is probably about the right size. It's not an exact science, but it is really useful. You can also do the same on the vertical line. So you can sort of pick up this oval and then double it, and see that, oh, quite handily, it actually measures up to the top of the pincer there. So you can do the same thing. So we pick our oval up, 1. Oh, so I see I have not made my pincer nearly long enough. So there we go. Just it goes to show that, you know, sometimes things are not as they seem on the paper. So now we've pretty much got our main structure in here. What we're going to do is put some kind of, well, obviously our lobster hasn't got spindly arms like this. We're going to need to give him some extra shell, some width here. And so what I want you to do is really look carefully at how these little sections fit together. And if we start here with this one, so it's a fairly decent, you know, start to a leg. Think about sort of almost like a spider with lots of different joints. And this one is a little bit different as well. So what I'm doing is following the shape of the parts of the shell of the lobster, and really just almost not looking at it like it's a lobster, but just looking at it like it's a simple series of shapes and lines that I'm just sort of following. So this section here is going to be this bit that joins in like this. So curious looking, they really are. And then the pincer itself is huge and rounded. So it kind of bulges out a little bit at the top there, and then I can bring it up to the line that I've created, making sure I know it's the right size. And then here we've got some amazing sort of spikes. If they're a little bit hard to draw, you can always draw the main shape first, and then draw your spikes on afterwards. So now I'm sort of just adding in this bottom section of the main pincer, and then we've got the movable part here. And so that's sort of slotting in, it's fitting into the other pincer there. And we're going to do the same on the other side here. So we have, again, the same smaller sections here. Okay, so these pincers are on a different angle, so they're much longer. Well, it looks like they're much longer and thinner. So we're going to get the whole shape down first. It's just coming around like this, so we've got the tip sort of facing us, and that beautiful kind of curve that's coming up and around there. And then this is the movable part of the pincer. Just sort of one long thin triangle fitting in, a bit like that. Okay then, so now let's have a little bit of a look at the central body again. So there's lots of funny little areas, you know, these feelers, these little hairy little, I don't know what they are, these little bits here. So yeah, there's really a complex structure. And so because we've got our kind of face cross here, we know the line where the eyes are. So we can start to add the little beady eyes. Make sure they're not too close together because they are sort of facing either way. So we've got one and then two, and then we've got this little sort of ledge that's kind of little forehead, I suppose, coming over the top. And then what I want to do is just sort of mark out this area where the sort of shell finishes, and you start to get to see, I guess this in here is all the sort of the mouth, the teeth, the stomach, all of that kind of stuff. So we're just sketching it out super simply, and then we want to make sure we've got these incredible feelers or antennae, and these are the ones that you can sort of get a bit excitable with. So you can also put them in lots of funny positions. I'm going to go pretty true, but they can be, you know, a fun, almost a sort of moustache kind of addition to your drawing. And then, so this one is coming up and back, and I know we can't see the tip of it, whoops, but I'm going to add a little bit of something here as well, just to give them a little pizzazz. And then we want to get our feelers in at these bits coming out here. And so do again, make sure, so you know how we were looking at how the parts of the shell were fitting together, really good as well, just not to draw just the feelers, these little bits here, but also really pay attention as to how they fit back within the rest of the body of the lobster. We want to make sure they look like they're at home in the drawing, they're not just pinging out. Something a bit like that. And then we just maybe want to draw a couple of the lines in the shell, get sure. And then we start getting down to this really freaky looking bit here. I tell you what, I don't know why we look to film and fiction for our sort of sci-fi fix when actually all of these alien-like creatures are just living on our ocean floor already. Okay, and then we've got these areas, I think they're the sort of teeth of the lobster. So you don't have to go in too detailed at the moment. We really are, again, we're just sketching out where everything is. And of course, the fine liner pen, if you have one, or any pen, is actually going to be really, really good for picking out all of these details here. But if you're carrying on in pencil, that's absolutely fine as well. You can just revisit these sections and you can go back and add a bit more detail and texture. So now we're on to these little bits here, which I don't know the name of. And okay, now we're going to get the extra legs in, and of course we know that they have 4, but we can't actually see them all. So I'm going to start with these front 2 here, and again, in exactly the same way as you did the pincers, you can do that sort of line and dot technique for the joints, and they're sort of coming round here. That's the tip, that's the point there of the leg. And again, this one's coming out here. We've got a joint, another one, and another one. And you can see here that I've made sure that this leg is a little bit higher up than this one, so you're always making sure you've got everything in the right place. And then again, we can give our lobster a little bit more of a leg, making sure those bits of shell fit neatly into each other and nice and pointy at the end there. Same for this one. Oh, and we can't forget the tail as well, that lovely fanned tail. So something that's really useful is the line method. I use it quite a lot just to make sure things are all in the right place. So for example, you can ensure, so if you've drawn a part of your lobster, and then on the reference image you want to say figure out how far this little tail comes out, you understand that, okay, so we draw a line down from the tip of the tail, and what does it hit? It hits the front left leg, and so we've got the front left leg in, so we can take that all the way up and understand that, oh, that's the point that the tail of the lobster is coming out. And then we'll measure it out again. So yeah, it's about that, the corner of this leg here, go all the way up. That is our lobster tail. So hopefully you're still with me and you've got all of your lobster bits and pieces in the right place. It's certainly the most complex creature that we've drawn on these tutorials, but don't worry, I believe in every single one of you, and I think it's going to be a good drawing. So now I guess you have to decide whether you're going to be continuing in pencil, or if you're going to join me on the fine liner, or indeed any of the pens that you might have. And so if you are going into the drawing in pencil, then of course use, well, in the same way that we did in the other tutorials, you look and assess where the light is coming, you look and see where the shadows are, and you can, you know, shade in your lobster accordingly, and as well as using some lovely patches of darkness for all of these amazing sort of dots and spots going on your lobster. If you are wanting to draw with me in a bit of pen, then I'm going to leave my pencil drawing as is here, and I'm going to just get my fine liner. And what I'm going to do simply is just go over my lines. But instead of just sort of tracing over them, I'm still going to be referring back to the reference image, and I'm going to be sort of amending and refining my lines as I go along. Right, so usually I start with the eyes. I find them the windows to the soul of the lobster. And so I'm going to start with these, making sure my lines are all right. Giving the lobster a little bit of a glint in the eye there. Okay then, now we have all of our pen lines in. I can take my eraser and I can take out all of the pencil lines that we don't need anymore. A good trick is to make sure that the ink of your pen is dry. That is crucial. And just try and be a little bit gentle with the eraser. You don't want to take out any of your pen lines, and you don't want to damage the paper either. So you should start to see your lobster emerging in a little more detail than he was before. Okay, I think we are just about ready to go. So if you're with me still on the pen, what we want to do now is really get into all of the interesting pattern and the texture and the spiky bits and the knobbly bits of our lobster. This is when we're really going to bring him to life. So you can see on my one I made earlier here, what I've been trying to do is pick out the areas of shadow to begin with. And so I can see, you know, just from the reference image here, that naturally the legs that are underneath the lobster, they are darker. We've got some dark patches here on the pincer. The back is fairly dark, but it's also catching the light, so we want to maybe leave that without any shading at the moment. And so what I tend to do is, because obviously with pencil you can create a sort of smooth gradient, but with pen obviously we're working with something a little bit different, and so instead of kind of shading in, what I would do is I would use repetitive lines or a cross-hatching technique, and I'll show you what I mean. So the area, so I'm going to start with these legs here, and they're coming out from underneath our lobster's body, and so what I'm doing is just using my pen fairly gently, but I'm doing lots and lots of repetitive lines starting from the darkest part where the lobster is underneath. And what I'm trying to do is create a bit of a sort of an area of tone there, and you can use the pen in however way that you like. But for me, it makes sense to sort of follow the shape of the of whatever you're drawing with the lines of your pen. See, for areas in the background here, you can knock them back with just a little bit of sort of cross hatching here, so you can take your lines one way and then the other, and that's quite a nice method. I often stick to one way though, and I'm always trying to go the way that the shape of the lobster is going. So I'm following these lines and I'm following the shape of the shell round, and I'm just being quite free and easy with my pen. I'm just picking up those areas of shadow and darkness. And don't worry, you can always add in any extra spikes and knobbly bits. But for me, I like to start with the tone first and just start to give the lobster a little bit more of a sense of three-dimensionality, I suppose. Lobsters are also really, really old. So they have been on the earth for 140 million years, which is kind of amazing. So that's the current evolution of lobsters. I mean, a form of lobster has been in the oceans for many, many more millions than that. And as you're adding in your tone, you can also start to experiment a little bit with the pattern. So these lobsters have got the most beautiful shells. You know, they're covered in lots of dots and interesting patterns and shapes and things, and so you can just start to emulate that with your marks here. And now, if you're feeling like you're in a position where you've got most of the shading in and you're happy with the sort of pattern that you've got on your lobster's beautiful shell, it's a really fun last task to do, where we're going to add in all of the funny little spikes and the hairy bits. So all of these amazing food finding hairs on the lobster's legs, like this, and maybe a few spines as you go. Just really amp up that amazing sort of curious texture that they have. And the last thing we might want to do is make sure our lobster isn't floating in midair. You know, he needs a bit of a sense of gravity. He needs, you know, a bit of context. And you want to show that he is sort of sitting on the floor here. And so the way that I would do that is with a little bit of shadow. And so where he's meeting the floor here, I'll just give him a little bit of shadow underneath. So you can do that with just a few nice horizontal lines of your pen. And then here as well, you don't need to give him a full shadow underneath unless you want to. Sometimes a little bit goes a long way. This one here as well, this pincer needs a little bit of shadow. So you can add in any extra last little bits that you might want to add. Of course, there's no time limit here. You can take as long as you like. Lovely. So I think I'm maybe just about finished with my lovely lobster here. I think we should give a nod to the Fortnum and Mason lobsters and perhaps add a little bit of a top hat to our drawing. And now on my one I made earlier, I gave the little lobster a top hat right on the top of his head, but I wasn't sure, maybe this time I could perhaps give him a little top hat, perhaps in his little waving hand here, sort of, you know, he was doffing his cap at us. And so I might see if I can just fit a little bit of a top hat in here. Good to draw it out in pencil first, so you know it's going to work. And then let's maybe give that little top hat a bit of a stripe. We can give that hat a little bit of pizzazz on the side there. And there we go. A lovely jolly lobster with a little top hat. Sign your work like the true artist that you all are, and very well done. Well, that's it from me. Thank you so much for joining. If you're going to post your lobster on social media, make sure you tag us with the hashtags Fortnums and wildlife drawing, because we'd love to see your interpretations. And until next time, keep practicing that drawing, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.